Okay, good morning, everybody. Senate Transportation Committee, Friday morning. We're going to continue our discussion on S99. We're talking about the towing section. Anybody has just some new language for us? So we'll start there.
Okay. So I will put up on the screen what is draft 2.1 dated today, 5/5/23 at 8:35 a.m. It'll have both yellow and gray highlighting. That will be how you know you are looking at the correct version. And I'll put it up on the screen. So to just bring everyone to the same place where you left off on, it would have been, I think, Wednesday, you had looked at, when you were doing your walkthrough of the side-by-side, you had looked at language that had come over from the House, and they had taken out the lien language that you had included with respect to the towing industry, and instead had included a report, not necessarily as a substitute for the lien, but as something that was going to comprehensively look at and I do not see it, sorry. Oh, further proposal amendment, there we go. You looked at that language. You also had alternative language that had been proposed by the towing industry. So what you see highlighted in either yellow or gray is a difference from what the House had included as their reporting language. And if it is highlighted in gray, that's the difference from draft 1.1 to draft 2.1. So what is this report going to do? It's tasking the Office of the Attorney General, that hasn't changed. It's giving a little bit more specificity in subsection A in terms of what the report is supposed to look at. So the report shall study motor vehicle towing practices, including practices related to abandonment or suspected abandonment of motor vehicles, and then specifically calling out such as the use of liens and bonds to ensure the recoupment of costs borne by towing companies, and then also not limited just to the lien, but looking at storage practices and pricing. And it'll go into more detail later on, but that's setting it up to say this is what the report's going to look at. Subsection B, this is saying who needs to be involved in the report. So in conducting the study, the Office of the Attorney General needs to consult with, and it doesn't talk about the working group process anymore, but they need to consult with, and the same state consulting entities that the House had are included here, but with the addition of the Department of Public Safety, and that ties in to some of the language that you'll see added later on that talks about how the towing business is serving a public health, safety, welfare need. So the consulting entities are the Department of Financial Regulation, that's related to the regulation of insurance companies, the Department of Motor Vehicles, cars, the Department of Public Safety, law enforcement, the Office of Professional Regulation, the entity that regulates a lot of other professional industries in Vermont, and the Office of the Vermont State Treasurer. They deal with the abandonment of property. And then needs to solicit input and public comment from interested persons. That list of 11 stakeholders or 10 stakeholders and one catch-all stakeholder of any interested person has been removed. We were just leaving it to the Office of the Attorney General to solicit input and public comment from interested persons at their determination, and requiring that there be at least one public hearing. Well, that's highlighted in gray. It's highlighted in gray because it moved. There was always the requirement in the House language that said there needed to be at least one public hearing. Subsection C goes into what the study needs to address at a minimum, and that's going to include pricing of pleasure car and commercial vehicle towing and recovery, including from state and town highways that are restricted based on motor vehicle sizes. House included that language to address things like stoppages and vehicles that are being towed from sort of tricky situations. Also needs to address crash site remediation, including the costs borne by towing companies, storage practices, and within storage practices, you're calling out including, we don't use, but not limited to in statute or in law, but they certainly could look at more than just these three things with related to storage practices. But for storing, they're required to look at pricing, and then vehicle access for both personal belongings from like a pleasure car and access for the removal of cargo, and that's going to be on more of a commercial level. Also need to look at practices related to abandonment or suspected abandonment when necessary or appropriate. I think that would cover, and this is language that came up from the House, using a lien because that's related to this vehicle we think is abandoned. We want to get paid for it. We want to lien on the vehicle and its belongings to make sure that our costs are recouped. So I think 4 covers the lien without calling out the lien. But, and now we get into item 5 that needs to be looked at, best practices from other states, and it's another including list. So these are things that the Attorney General's office will need to look at in terms of what are other states doing. Need to do a comprehensive survey of, and we now have 3 things listed as opposed to just 1 thing listed for what the comprehensive survey of laws from other states need to look at, and that's going to be motor vehicle lien laws, laws related to access to towed motor vehicles for purposes of removal of personal belongings and cargo, and laws related to pricing, including for towing and recovery, remediation, and storage. And then you've got the balance of the language that was added in draft 1.1, which is really looking at some of the specifics of what your lien language would have done. So using a statutory lien, if a motor vehicle has been towed at either the request of the owner or it's an abandoned vehicle, in order to secure payment for a towing business's towing and recovery, storage, and remediation charges. Also looking at retaining by the towing company the motor vehicle and the contents of the motor vehicle until the towing business's costs have been paid, and the use of a surety bond. That was another thing that was included in your language as an alternative to having the lien be paid, saying, here's a bond, we can get our vehicle and the cargo contents back, and we'll sort it out afterwards, but you're holding this bond as a temporary means. And then the balance of the language is going to look the same as what came over for the House. The report also needs to include recommendations for amendments to state statute. Maybe that's going to be having a lien. Maybe that's going to be having the towing industry be regulated with a registration fee by the DMV. Maybe it's going to have statutory maximums for towing fees or storage fees. You don't know. This is leaving it to the Attorney General to make those recommendations for what they think should be changed to state statutes. And then the final sort of catch-all item is anything else that the Attorney General's office thinks that you should have that's pertinent to the study. The report needs to come back with its recommendations to House committees on Commerce and Economic Development, on Government Operations and Military Affairs, and on Transportation. So you've got commerce covered, regulation of state government, if there's going to be sort of an OPR or DMV regulatory piece there, and obviously transportation, and then the corresponding committees on the Senate side. Report needs to come back on or before December 15th, 2023. And then you are requiring in subdivision 2 that the recommendations in the written report need to balance the needs of towing businesses and consumers and reflect the necessary role towing businesses serve in maintaining the health, safety, and welfare of Vermonters. This hasn't been edited. Please suggest more changes that you want to see made. I can get it edited after that. And this is the current best attempt at harmonizing the competing languages you are being given.
On page 1, line 19, when we add interested persons, does that preclude groups? Do we need to say that we're looking for, interested entities and persons, or is persons count because corporations are people count?
Yeah, so I don't think you need to specifically call it out given the general definition that exists for all of the statutes annotated, which would be a tool of statutory interpretation and figuring out what persons means here. And persons, as we use in statute, is more than just like an individual human being. If you wanted to, because this is session law, you could certainly call it out. I think based on the testimony that's being heard in this committee, in the House, who gave testimony in the House, who gave testimony in the Senate, and the fact that you had a list of interested persons previously that have been taken out to give more flexibility in terms of who should be consulted, and all of those were entities. None of them was an individual person. I think it's pretty clear, but you certainly could flesh out persons more.
Just so I know, on top of page 2, when this is old language, so it's not new, but including from the state and Iowa that are restricted based on motor vehicle size. So is this one they're called to tow a vehicle that's pulled over by like DMV enforcement? So like, you can't drive this truck on this road?
No, I think the intent more there was to address things like if a vehicle is stuck in a covered bridge that was restricted based on height, or if it's stuck in the notch. Yeah. I don't think you necessarily need this language, but I think it's like giving a nudge to the Attorney General to say, there are situations in Vermont where a tow is more complicated than just there's a car on the side of the highway. The towing companies do more than just, you know, if I get into an accident on I-89 and my Subaru Forester is there.
So the last thing I have is on the, we say the recommendations in the report, but do we ever say that they need to do recommendations? Or I guess we do 6 as any applicable recommendations.
And then D1, the Attorney General shall file a written report on the study, including any recommendations it deems appropriate. So requiring the report to cover applicable recommendations in 2 places, 6 and D1.
And consumers is all inclusive of persons.
So that's a good question, because now we're out of like my drafting realm. I don't know if consumers are defined anywhere, but I think with this being with the Attorney General's office, probably the Consumer Protection Division there can have a good idea of who consumers.
Consumer protection, and just so, because the needs of the consumers could be, maybe we just say consumer protection. Thank you.
So balance the needs of towing businesses and consumer protections and reflect the necessary role.
Yeah, so I thought, just wondering, just as a sentence structure, if we say the needs of, or the balance consumer protection and the needs of towing business. So you have towing business with the part about the towing business.
Oh yeah, that's a good piece.
So just start with consumer protection.
Okay, so I think the way you want it to say is at the last page, the recommendations in the written report shall balance consumer protections and the needs of towing businesses, reflecting the necessary role towing businesses serve in, et cetera, et cetera.
That's good. Vote on it?
Sure.
Give him a quorum.
Yep.
I think from what we know of the others on the committee, they would support.
Are we talking though, before we vote on an amendment, the other 2 sections in question?
Yeah, we should probably look at that. I'm okay with it with the House's motorcycle.
You sure? Just strike with what you had.
We'll deal with it in the study. And it's already federal law, but since we're not enforcing it, it doesn't really matter if we say that they should follow federal law. Right?
Sometimes it's nice to see it in statute.
Right, yeah, it's nice to see it statute, but well, I can wait a year to see it statute.
Okay, so
So section 34, deleting in our further proposal amendment, that's that report on the 16,000, okay.
you got it. So this would be doing everything that the House wanted, except changing the towing report as we just talked about, and with section 34 being deleted, that's not having the oral report after 6 months for purposes of change in the reimbursement practices and how much has been paid out by the state in those. It would be $125 reimbursements. I can put that language up if you want to see it again. And then the second piece is the written report after 2 years. And the items that I had circled as things that you had not fully closed out were motorcycle noise labeling, which sounds like you're okay on now. The 2 towing sections that we just talked about, and everything else I had an okay.
So I'm fine with this. My last question is, I don't know if we can put Engels and Kitchell if they're not at the table right now on this amendment.
So you don't have custody of the bill right now because when it comes back from the other body, it's not referred to a committee. So what I can do is I can make the changes, I can have it edited, I can circulate it to all of you, and you can let me know if before you submit it to the Senate Secretary's office, you want any people removed.
So we won't vote on it now. We'll get that and talk to the other 2 members.
Yeah, I'd rather make sure we're all.
I could tell you, yeah.
Yeah, just let, I will get it edited as is. Let me know if any names need to come out. It's easier to take names out than add them back in.
On the report on motor vehicle noise, I saw that it was changed. What was the change that the House made?
Let's put up that language so you can see it. Sorry for how quickly I'm scrolling. Okay, so It's the addition of this new subdivision 4 in terms of what the study and report needs to address. And it's expanding it from what was was more closely limited to what you would do at the inspection and what you would do in terms of enforcement related to noise testing, but looking at alternative ways of addressing excessive motor vehicle noise that do not involve noise testing, such as visual inspections for modifications to the exhaust system and labeling on one or more components of a motor vehicle's exhaust system. So this is where the motorcycle labeling piece has kind of been absorbed into the report. And that's it in terms of the changes.
But they will also look at the vehicle noise with testing.
Yeah, so they're looking at,
Who's doing it, the lead?
no, the DMV in consultation with public safety and the league. And just as a reminder, when you say we can deal with this next year, you're
That's
actually
right.
dealing with it in 2 years, because this is the one report that's coming back in 2025.
Because they're doing the modernization project.
If Corporal Davidson is retiring.
All right, he doesn't want to have to deal with it. Yeah, we have to get it past his retirement date.
Got the
David.
Last question, Chair.
Yep.
We have quite an audience today, and I'm just kind of curious if anybody has anything they want to offer on any of this, but.
Thank you.
Good.
So do we have anything else? Do you have anything?
No, sir.
Do we have anything, 99, we still got some more items we haven't closed?
Yeah.
Oh, that was.
This is it, these are the last two things. So you would be offering 2 instances of amendment to take out the $16,000 report and to make modifications to the towing practices report.
Good. All right, well, that's a good idea. That way we'll have a chance to look at it and we can all agree or disagree or whatever we do. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
so I'll go make those changes. I'll get it to editing and then I'll come back for your